Hi, I'm back. I haven't made a video for quite a while, so I've been a bit busy. I thought it was about time I got another one out. So what I really wanted to talk about today were basically the firearms and basically personal weapons, and more towards the rifles that the average sort of squaddy soldier used in the First World War. I own a couple of examples which we'll go through. Unfortunately it's not a thorough collection as much as I'd like it to be, but never mind, you can't have everything. So I just thought we'd talk about the general aspects of the rifles of the period, which I'm sure most people are familiar with. Now this is an SMLE, a Lee Enfield. This one's dated 1917. It's a Mark III Star, but I think it's been refurbed at some point, probably when it went back after the war, but there's a few features that lend itself to me thinking that, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. But anyway, the basic features of the weapons at the time were bolt action. You had to do that every time you wanted to load and fire the gun, so one shot at a time, pull the bolt back, eject the empty one, put a new one in. They all had roughly 5 shots to 10 shots in the magazine. The Lee Enfield was the biggest with 10. The average was about 5, the Germans and the Americans in their Springfield having 5. You won't be able to see it very well, but just a basic V-notch rear sight and a simple post foresight. This one is windage adjustable, so you could adjust it by to left or right depending on the sort of state of the wind. And they all were generally finished, as this one is, with very nice walnut or a sort of similar wood finish, usually covering the entire length of the barrel. I believe the theory on this was to protect the barrel, and also if during continuous fire it got warm, you weren't putting your hands directly onto metal. So that was the reason why. And the other factor of the weapons considered at the time was the quality of manufacture. All these weapons were very well made. They all probably outshot the users. They had relatively heavy barrels, they had long barrels, they were firing high velocity rounds which were designed to go out to 500 metres plus, up to about 1,000 yards, were really just not a problem at all, and if not beyond, you know, with a bit of luck, or if you had a scope perhaps that might be able to help you. But just going back to the actual quality of manufacture, most of the parts are machined, they're not cast, so they're all milled out solid blocks, unlike when you see in the Second World War, and the Lee Enfield #4 is an example of this. Stuff's cast, stuff's roughly machined. You know, you still see the tool marks, but everything's finished to a high grade of sort of gunsmithing. Even to the extent, you know, you've got a brass butt plate there, which has a little hole which I won't be able to undo now, but that flips up, and in there is your cleaning kit. So, general features, they were all roughly the same. Each rifle of the period had its own pros and cons. Like I said, for instance, the Enfield here, it had a 10-shot magazine, which basically meant sustained fire was much more available to the British than perhaps the Germans. Now, one real weapon that stood out was the French Lebel, which was probably a little bit archaic. I mean, it had a tubular magazine which went underneath the rifle. Now this was a bit dodgy considering the rounds were pointed, and therefore the point of the round was on the base, resting on the primer. So it wasn't unusual if you dropped or gave the rifle a sharp judder that it could set a round off in the magazine. Hence why most of them were stacked, as the Enfield, the German, the American, and I suppose the Austro-Hungarians were as well. So all around sit on top of each other in there. This is sort of stacking, so one goes to the left, one goes to the right, and so forth. It's not a straight column. So basically, the the rifle at this point went quite an interesting transformation. Before the First World War, there used to be long rifles, or sort of basically the standard rifle your infantrymen would be issued with, and then there would be carbines that the cavalry or artillerymen would be issued with, because the theory was that for them it was a secondary weapon. It wasn't what they really did, but they may need it as just a close sort of quarters weapon to fend off an attack if the enemy broke through or they encountered the enemy for whatever reason. But it was always felt the infantryman needed to have the most accurate rifle available to him, and for this obviously the length of barrel was required. However, what you'll probably notice, I am quite tall, so it probably looks even smaller than normal on me, but it isn't a massive gun, the Enfield. I mean, if you even compare it to one of its contemporaries, the P14, P14 itself isn't that much longer. So from the long lead, which came around just before the turn of the century, sort of the late 1890s, they really just sort of changed how they felt the rifle should be used and what its actual purpose was. Because they found basically people, the average human, unless he was aided with a telescope, isn't going to be able to hit anything accurately sort of above 500 metres, or a man-sized target that's crouched in the grass. Very hard to see that far away. So why have something that can hit somebody at 800-900 metres, no problem, when 9 times out of 10 you can't see them? I mean, that's the reason now why most of the militaries are using 5.56, because they found out in the Second World War most exchanges only took place at 300 metres or less, so why carry a heavy round that needs loads of training to be able to shoot accurately when you're never going to be shooting it accurately above 300 metres? And anybody that is, provide them with a specialist weapon, such as like a sniper rifle or a marksman's rifle, so they're able to reach out that little bit further. So I believe after sort of the Boer War, they decided to standardise it. And not only did that help sort of the soldier in terms of he's got a more handy rifle, it meant spares, logistically, everything was easy because everybody had the same weapon. There was no messing around, no pissing around to get the Longley Enfield parts against the carbine parts. Each part was interchangeable. So with that, that's why you're really going to see the adoption of the SMLE, what became known as the short magazine Lee Enfield. Interestingly enough, the German rifle, the Gewehr 98, which they entered the First World War with and saw them all the way through, was still quite a long rifle. It had a couple of inches on the Enfield, and was actually still a hark back to one of the earlier sort of designs around the turn of the century, if not slightly before. That's not to say it wasn't a good rifle. I mean, it's a fantastic rifle. The fact the Germans retained it all the way up through until the end of 1945, after the Second World War, about a few modifications admittedly, but effectively the same rifle. Somebody 50 years earlier wouldn't be surprised. They wouldn't be surprised in the design, they would recognise it, they'd understand how it worked. So it has some merit. The rifle, the Germans, the G98, was probably a more accurate rifle than the SMLE that the British entered the war with, because it had a long barrel, it was probably machined to higher tolerances, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the bullet is just the 8mm 7.92 is a better round than the Lee Enfield. But as I mentioned, all these little bits and pieces don't actually matter so much, because if you're jumping into a trench, or if you're only shooting over 100 metres, these rounds relatively have all the same performance. There's not one that does more damage or is more accurate over that distance. They're all pretty much exactly the same. One thing the British were obviously very worried at this point was about the length of their rifle when, like I say, jumping into a trench, or when you encountered the German, whose rifle was quite a bit longer. So, I mean, obviously this was a 1907 bayonet, but this was so the British still felt adequate, so you could still say mine was as big as yours. So as you can see, this takes what is originally a very handy rifle into being quite a cumbersome thing. Like, it is quite awkward. And bear in mind, with the Long-Lee Enfield rifle, the British actually had quite a short bayonet, probably about so big. But they felt they needed to retain the reach that the actual length of the original Long-Lee gave you. So, hence why the 1907, I think it's 14 inches, but again I might be wrong there, had such a long bayonet. The Germans, theirs was a lot shorter and very similar to the one they went through the Second World War with, but they had a huge variation in bayonets. They had sawback bayonets, almost a bow knife. I think it's like a bow knife, it's bowed anyway, it's got a huge blade on it. And apparently if the British or any Commonwealth soldiers caught the Germans with the sawback bayonets, because they had a saw for chopping wood across the top here, they would supposedly shoot them on the spot, but I haven't read anything of that. It seems to me to be hearsay, but I bet it probably went on because it looks like a horrific weapon. So this is just it for part 1. I will get part 2 followed up in a few moments, and we'll see you shortly.